Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's EBC video. We're here at Cleary Lake Park to think a little bit more about John 14, verses 15 through 21 this week. Now, this is an interesting passage because Jesus is continuing to teach his disciples, and he's saying things in his own words as he's talking to them. The first thing he says in verse 15 here is, and I've got it in front of me because we're going to talk a little bit about some really specific wording here. He says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." Now just think about that for a moment. It sounds almost a little transactional, right? It sounds like kind of that straight line between loving Jesus and then doing something for Jesus. I have to say, I'm reminded a little bit of a story of when I was a kid. I had a bedroom that I shared with my brother, and at night, after we got in bed and we weren't quite asleep yet, and you started to feel a little thirsty, and the kitchen was a long way away, I remember every once in a while either my brother saying to me or me saying to my brother, and I think it was usually me saying it to my brother, "Hey, if you loved me, you'd go get me a glass of water." And you'd say it a couple more times and you'd pester, and then pretty soon maybe he'd go get it for you, and maybe he wouldn't. I don't know if you have stories like that with your siblings where you sort of tried to play that love is a leverage type of issue. And I think there's a way in which sort of one could maybe misunderstand or sort of interpret only in one way the idea of Jesus saying, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments," as sort of being this idea that, like, hey, you can show that love, you can prove that love almost by doing the things that I've asked you to do. I don't think that's exactly what Jesus is talking about here. Now in verse 21 in the English Standard Version, Jesus continues to talk about love, and he says, "Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me, and he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him." And again, I think that at first that almost sounds transactional. Like the idea is that if you do certain things, you'll be the ones that see Jesus, and you'll be the ones that Jesus will actually manifest himself to. And while I know that one of the things that that's talking about is the idea that by doing things, we see Jesus around us, we experience Jesus, and we show Jesus, I don't know that it's meant to be necessarily all that transactional. So what is happening in these things? Well, in these verses, some of the other versions of the Bible, rather than the English Standard Version, and I love the word love, by the way, don't get me wrong, but they talk a little bit more about Jesus being in us and us being in Jesus. It gives a little bit more of a sense of a circle rather than that straight line, rather than that transaction. And if you know anything about Cleary Lake Park, by the way, this path that I'm standing on right now leads to a giant 3.5-mile circle. And so if we think a little bit more about what Jesus is saying is, there's a circle here where I'm going to be in you and you're going to be in me. And then when I say that if you love me, you will keep my commandments, I'm also saying that I'm going to help you do that. I'm going to bring that advocate for you. And so it's never going to be just you in charge of running toward me. I'm going to be running toward you at the same time. We're going to be doing this thing together. The best thing about John 14 actually comes in John 13, because before Jesus is talking about us keeping his commandments, he's actually in John 13 given us a new commandment, that we would show others the same love that Jesus has shown us, that we would love others as Jesus has loved us. And so as we think about what John 14 is telling us about keeping Jesus's commandments, it's really about showing that love and experiencing that love and doing it as that circle, that relationship that we have with Jesus, and not just the idea of sort of doing something to earn or doing something to somehow create that grace, which we don't do ourselves. We don't earn ourselves. Jesus brings that for us by having died for us on the cross. So everyone, have a great week. Think about that love and think about that relationship that's a circle that you have with Jesus. And by the way, as we're thinking about love this week, happy Mother's Day too.